The notice hung on the trading post wall for 3 weeks. No one answered. Then a wagon pulled up carrying a woman, 3 children, and the smell of fresh bread. And the loneliest rancher in the territory forgot every reason he had to say no. The Colorado Territory in the autumn of 1874 was a land that required 2 things of every person who lived upon it: strength and stubbornness. The mountains did not care about ambition. The plains did not reward intelligence. The winters did not negotiate with hope. If a person was strong enough to endure and stubborn enough to remain, the land allowed them to stay. If not, it sent them back east with nothing but stories about how hard the West truly was. Silas Greer had both strength and stubbornness in quantities that most men would consider excessive. He was 43 years old. Built wide and solid like the barn he had raised with his own hands 16 years earlier, his face was weathered the way canyon walls are weathered, not ruined, shaped, carved by years of wind and sun, and cold into something that looked permanent. His eyes were pale blue, the color of winter sky just before storm, and they carried the particular flatness of a man who had stopped expecting anything from life except the work it demanded each morning. His ranch sat in a valley east of a town called Red Willow, 300 acres of grazing land, bordered by a creek to the south and foothills to the north. He ran cattle, 60 head, not enough to make him wealthy, enough to keep him occupied. Enough to justify getting up before dawn and falling into bed after dark, and filling the hours between with labors so constant it left no room for the thing he was truly trying to avoid: silence. The ranch had a house, a barn, a bunkhouse that had once held 3 hands, but now held none because Silas had let them go one by one as the operation shrank and his temperament grew sharper. A corral, a chicken coop, a root cellar. All the structures a working ranch required, and all of them empty except for him. Silas had been married once. Her name was Eleanor. She had auburn hair and a laugh that could make the horses turn their heads. She had come from Illinois with expectations that the West would be an adventure. It was, for 2 years. Then the adventure became routine, and the routine became isolation, and the isolation became a silence so heavy that she packed a single bag on a Tuesday morning while Silas was checking fence lines and left on the eastbound stage without leaving a note. That was 9 years ago. Silas had not spoken her name since. He had removed every trace of her from the house. Her curtains, her dishes, the rocking chair she had brought from her mother's parlor. He placed them all in the barn loft and never went up there again. The house became a functional space, not a home. A place where a man ate and slept and sat in the evenings staring at a fire that warmed his body, but not the cold, expanding space inside his chest. He cooked for himself, badly. Beans and salt pork, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. He ate standing at the counter because sitting at the table alone required acknowledging that the other chair was empty, and that acknowledgement led to thoughts he had no interest in entertaining. By the autumn of 1874, the situation had deteriorated past what even his stubbornness could sustain. He had lost weight. His clothes hung looser. His energy flagged by mid-afternoon. The ranch work was suffering because the rancher was not eating enough to fuel the labor required to maintain it. He needed a cook, not a wife, not a companion, not a conversation. A cook. Someone who could prepare proper meals and keep the kitchen functional and leave him alone the rest of the time. A simple transaction. Labor for wages. Nothing more. He wrote the notice himself, in handwriting that was more functional than elegant. Pencil on brown paper. C.O. Coke wanted Ranch work, room and meals, profit. A plea at Greer, ranch east of Red Willow. No experience with cattle required. Must tolerate silence. He nailed it to the board outside the trading post in Red Willow and rode home, expecting a response within the week. No one responded. 1 week became 2. 2 became 3. The notice curled at the edges from rain and sun. The pencil faded. The paper softened, and Silas continued eating beans from a pot he no longer bothered to properly clean. On the 23rd day, a wagon appeared on the road leading to his gate. It was not a proper wagon. It was a farm cart. Wooden sides. Canvas stretched over bent hoops to form a cover that had seen better decades. It was pulled by a single mule that looked as tired as the cart looked old. The whole arrangement moved slowly, deliberately, with the cautious pace of something carrying more weight than it was designed for. Silas stood on his porch, watching it approach. His arms were crossed. His pale blue eyes carried the expression of a man who was already preparing reasons to say no to whatever was about to be asked of him. The wagon stopped at his gate. A woman climbed down from the seat. She was 31 years old. Her name was Abigail Harding. She had dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and brown eyes that were simultaneously tired and alert in the way that only mother's eyes managed to be. She wore a clean but faded calico dress in a pattern that had probably been cheerful once, but had been washed into something closer to memory. Her boots were worn but well maintained. Her hands were rough from work. She carried herself with the posture of someone who had been standing for a very long time and intended to keep standing for as long as necessary. She looked at the ranch, at the house, at the barn, at Silas standing on the porch, like a fortress designed to keep people out. Then 3 children appeared from behind the canvas cover of the 2. Wagon. The oldest was a boy, 10 years old. Dark-haired like his mother, with serious eyes that watched the world the way animals watch open spaces, carefully, looking for threats. His name was Samuel. The middle child was a girl, 7, with brown curls that refused to stay pinned, and a face that carried the particular determination of a child who has decided that the world will not defeat her, even though it has been trying. Her name was Nell. The youngest was a boy, 4 years old, holding the hem of his mother's dress with one hand and a wooden horse with the other. His name was Henry. He looked at Silas the way small children look at mountains, with wonder rather than fear. Abigail straightened her dress. She walked to the gate. She looked directly at Silas with brown eyes that did not flinch or beg or look away. "I am here about the notice," she said. Her voice was clear and steady. "I can cook, sir, but I come with 3 children." She paused, not for dramatic effect, because honesty required it. "We come as a family or not at all." Silas looked at her. He looked at the 3 children standing beside the wagon. He looked at the mule that was already eating his fence grass. He looked at the sky as if it might offer guidance, which it did not. Everything in his carefully constructed solitary existence told him to say no. He wanted a cook, not a family. Not noise, not children running through his barn and asking questions and leaving small boots by his door. He had built his life specifically to avoid exactly this. Exactly this. "Can you make biscuits?" he asked. The question surprised even him. "I can make biscuits that would make you forget your own name," she said, no boasting in her voice. Just fact. Silas was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the valley. One of the horses in the corral nickered. Little Henry waved at him from behind his mother's. Kurt. Kitchen is through the front door on the left, Silas said. Bunkhouse is clean. You and the children can have it. Meals at dawn, noon, and sundown. Wages paid monthly. He turned to go inside. What about the silence? Abigail asked. He stopped. Your notice said, must tolerate silence. I have 3 children, Mr. Greer. Silence is not something we carry in abundance. He looked at her over his shoulder. For the first time in years, something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The memory of where a smile used to live. I suppose I will have to tolerate the noise instead, he said. He went inside. Abigail looked at her children. Samuel looked at his mother with the cautious hope of a boy who had learned not to trust good things too quickly. Nell was already examining the chicken coop with professional interest. Henry waved at the closed door. They moved into the bunkhouse that afternoon. Abigail cleaned it in 2 hours with an efficiency that suggested she had been cleaning spaces that did not belong to her for most of her adult life. She made beds. She hung the children's clothes on nails she hammered into the wall herself. She placed a small framed drawing of a wild flower on the shelf above the stove because beauty, she believed, was not a luxury. It was a necessity disguised as one. She cooked her first meal at sundown. Silas sat at the kitchen table, the same table he had been eating standing beside for 3 years. He sat because she had set a place, a plate, a fork, a napkin folded beside the plate, in a way that suggested someone cared about how things were presented, even when the audience was a gruff rancher who had not used a napkin since his wife left. She placed biscuits on the table. Golden, warm. The smell filled the kitchen and drifted into rooms that had not smelled like anything except dust and loneliness for years. Silas picked up. He bit into it. He chewed slowly. Something shifted behind his pale blue eyes. Something tectonic. Something that had been frozen for a long time beginning to thaw, despite his best efforts to keep it solid. These are acceptable, he said. Abigail almost smiled. She recognized a man protecting himself with understatement. She had been married to one. She understood the language. I will take acceptable, she said. For now. The children ate in the bunkhouse. Silas could hear them through the walls. Laughter. The particular chaos of small people existing loudly in a space that was not designed for them. Henry singing a song that had no discernible melody. Nell arguing with Samuel about something involving chickens. The noise should have bothered him. He had specifically requested silence. He had built a life around silence. He had used silence the way other men used fences, to keep things out. But sitting at his kitchen table eating the best biscuit he had tasted in a decade, listening to the distant sound of children laughing in his bunkhouse, Silas Greer felt something he could not name. It felt like the opposite of silence. It felt like the house was breathing again. The days that followed established a rhythm that Silas did not consciously agree to, but could not find the energy to resist. Abigail cooked 3 meals a day, each one better than the last. Stews that warmed him from the inside. Bread that made the kitchen smell like a place someone actually wanted to be. Pies made from dried apples she had brought in the wagon. Rolled and crimped with hands that treated pastry the way a carpenter treats fine wood. She cleaned the house, not because he asked, because she could not exist in a space that was not cared for. She scrubbed floors he had neglected. She washed windows that had not been transparent in years. She hung dried herbs from the kitchen ceiling that made the air smell like something between garden and memory. She did all of this without asking permission, without waiting to be told. without the hesitation of a person unsure of their place. She simply saw what needed doing, and did it with the quiet authority of a woman who had been running things alone for longer than anyone had given her credit for. Silas watched this happen to his house, the way a man watches a river change the shape of the land around it, slowly, inevitably, without any way to stop it, even if he wanted to. He was not sure he wanted to. The children were harder to ignore than the cooking. Samuel was watchful and careful, and did not trust Silas. This was reasonable. The boy had lost his father to a mine collapse 2 years earlier, and had learned at 8 years old that men you depend on can disappear without warning. He kept his distance. He did his chores. He spoke to Silas only when directly addressed, and his dark, serious eyes watched the rancher constantly, measuring, evaluating, waiting for the inevitable disappointment that experience had taught him was coming. Nell was the opposite. She was everywhere, in the barn examining tools, in the chicken coop, counting eggs with the intensity of a banker conducting an audit, in the corral talking to horses that looked at her with the same mild bewilderment that Silas felt. She asked questions the way rain falls, constantly and without regard for whether the ground was ready to receive them. Why do cows stand facing the same direction? Do horses dream? Why don't you smile, Mr. Greer? That last question, delivered while Silas was mending a fence on a Tuesday afternoon, stopped his hands mid-motion. He looked at the 7-year-old girl standing beside him with her brown curls escaping their pins and her face arranged in genuine curiosity. "I smile," he said. "I have not seen it," she replied. "Maybe you are not looking at the right times?" "I am always looking," she said, matter-of-factly. And she was. Nell watched everything with the comprehensive attention of a child, determined to understand the world she had been placed in. Regardless of whether the world cooperated, Henry was the smallest siege weapon Silas had ever encountered. The 4-year-old had no concept of the rancher's boundaries because he had no concept of boundaries in general. He followed Silas like a shadow with short legs. He appeared beside him at the fence line. He sat on the porch step while Silas sat in the chair. He held up his wooden horse for inspection at random intervals throughout the day. "His name is Captain," Henry informed Silas one morning. "That is a good name," Silas said, because there was literally nothing else to say to a 4-year-old holding a wooden horse with the solemnity of a priest holding a relic. "He is brave," Henry continued. "I can see that. You can hold him if you want." Silas looked at the small wooden horse being offered by 2 even smaller hands. He took it. He held it carefully. The way you hold something that matters enormously to someone who matters more than you expected. "Thank you," he said. Henry smiled with his entire face and walked away satisfied that the most important transaction of his morning had been completed successfully. Silas sat on the porch holding the wooden horse for a long time after that. Something was happening inside his chest, something structural, as if walls he had built carefully over 9 years were being dismantled not by force, but by a 4-year-old with a wooden horse and a 7-year-old who noticed he did not smile, and the 10-year-old whose distrust was so familiar it felt like looking in a mirror, and by a woman who made biscuits that tasted like forgiveness and cleaned windows until his house could see again. Abigail told him her story. One evening, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch. The first time she had sat on his porch. The sunset was painting the valley in colors that seemed specifically designed to make a person honest. Her husband James had been a good man, a miner, not a gambler, or a drinker, or a dreamer. A worker. He went into the mountain every morning and came out every evening and put food on the table with hands that were never fully clean. He did not come out on a Thursday in September 2 years ago. The mine collapsed. 3 men were buried. James was one of them. They recovered him 4 days later. Abigail identified him by his boots because that was all that was identifiable. She said this without crying. She had done her crying, 2 years of it. Alone at night after the children were asleep, into pillows that dried by morning, so no one would know. I sold what we had, she said. It was not much. I moved 3 times looking for work. Most people do not want to hire a woman with 3 children. They want a cook, not a family. She looked at him in the fading light. You are the first person who said yes. Silas looked at the valley, at the colors draining from the sky, at the last light catching the tops of the mountains. I said yes to the biscuits, he said quietly. The family was unexpected. And now? She asked. He was quiet for a long time. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, Henry laughed in his sleep. The sound carried across the yard like a small bell ringing in an empty church. And now I cannot remember what the silence sounded like, he said. And I do not want to. Autumn deepened into winter. The first snow came in November and covered the valley in white. Abigail kept the house warm and the meals coming and the children occupied in ways that prevented them from destroying the barn, which Nell had been eyeing with increasingly ambitious plans. Silas found himself doing things he had not done in years. He repaired the rocking chair from the barn loft. He did not tell Abigail where it came from. He simply placed it on the porch one morning and said nothing. She sat in it that evening and rocked gently while the children played in the last light, and Silas pretended to read a newspaper he had already read twice. He carved a new wooden horse for Henry because Captain was losing a leg. He did not announce this either. He left it on the bunkhouse step. Henry found it and carried it to Silas with the expression of a child who has just witnessed a miracle. Captain has a friend, Henry declared. Every captain needs a lieutenant, Silas said. He helped Samuel with the cattle, not by instructing, by working beside him in silence, day after day, showing the boy that a man could be present without leaving. That reliability was not a word, but an action repeated until it became trust. It took 3 months. 3 months of side-by-side silence before Samuel asked his first voluntary question. Did you build this fence yourself? I did. Can you teach me? Silas handed him a hammer. Samuel took it, and in that small exchange, something healed that both of them had been carrying. For Nell, he built a small shelf in the chicken coop so she could keep her egg-counting ledger dry. She thanked him by presenting a weekly egg report that was more detailed than some territorial government documents. Spring arrived. The snow melted. The creek ran high. The valley turned green, and the cattle grew fat. And the house that had been a functional space for a solitary man became something else entirely. It became loud. It became messy. It became full of small boots by the door, and drawings on the kitchen wall, and a wooden horse named Captain and his lieutenant standing guard on the windowsill. It became home, Abigail, and Silas not spoken about what was growing between them. They communicated in the language of frontier people who have been hurt before, through actions, through presence, through the careful accumulation of mornings where coffee was ready, and evenings where the porch was shared, and the specific gravity of 2 people orbiting each other with increasing closeness while pretending the orbit was accidental. She mended his shirts without being asked. He fixed the bunkhouse roof before the spring rains. She left a piece of pie on the counter after supper. He left wildflowers in a jar by the kitchen window, pie and flowers. Their conversation, as honest as anything either of them had ever said out loud. It was Nell who broke the silence. Of course it was. She walked up to Silas on a May afternoon while he was oiling a saddle and said with the directness that only a 7-year-old possesses, "Are you going to marry my mother?" Silas stopped oiling. "Why do you ask?" "Because you look at her the way Papa used to. And she smiles when you are not watching. And Henry already calls you Papa when you are not in the room." Silas put down the saddle oil. He looked at this small, fierce girl with her wild curls and her absolute lack of patience for adult nonsense. "Would that be acceptable to you?" he asked. "I have conditions," she said. "Of course you do. I keep my chicken ledger, nobody touches my egg records, and I get a horse for my birthday." "That seems reasonable." "Then yes," she said, "it would be acceptable." He proposed to Abigail that evening, not with a ring, not with a speech. He simply sat beside her on the porch in the rocking chair he had repaired and said, "I put that notice up looking for a cook. I believe I found something considerably more than that." Abigail looked at him. Her brown eyes were full and bright. The sunset painted her face in gold. "Are you asking me to?" "Stay, Mr. Greer." "I am asking you to stay, Abigail." It was the first time he had used her name. The sound of it in his voice, in the voice that had been silent for 9 years, in the voice that had demanded silence from the world and received it, until a wagon showed up with a woman, and 3 children, and the smell of fresh bread, was enough. "Then I will stay," she said. "We will all stay." They married in June. In the yard between the house and the barn, the preacher came from Red Willow. Samuel stood beside Silas holding the ring. Nell stood beside her mother, holding a ledger, because she intended to record the occasion with the same thoroughness she applied to egg production. Henry held Captain and his lieutenant, one in each hand, and when the preacher asked if anyone objected, Henry held up the wooden horses and said, "Captain says yes." Everyone laughed, even Silas. A real laugh, full and deep and rusty from 9 years of disuse. It surprised him, the way sunrise surprises a man who has been sitting in the dark so long he forgot the light existed. Years passed. The ranch grew. Samuel became a cattleman. Nell became the most organized person in the territory. Henry became a horseman who credited his career to a wooden captain and his lieutenant. And Silas Greer, the man who had posted a notice requesting silence, spent the rest of his life surrounded by the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. The notice still hung in the trading post for years after, faded and curled and barely legible, but everyone in Red Willow knew what it said, and everyone knew what answered it. Not a cook, a family, the kind that walks through your gate when you are not looking for them, the kind that feeds you biscuits and dismantles your walls, and leaves small boots by your door until you cannot imagine the door without them. The kind that arrives in a broken wagon pulled by a tired man, ool, and carrying everything that matters in the world. A mother, a boy with serious eyes, a girl with wild curls, a 4-year-old with a wooden horse, and the smell of fresh bread drifting across an empty yard on a cold morning. That is how love arrived at Greer Ranch. Not with a promise, not with a sunset, not with the dramatic sweep of legend. With a notice on a wall, and a woman brave enough to answer it.